Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Legendarium Podcast. I am your host, Craig Hanks, coming out of semi-retirement. Not really retirement, but I'm taking a hiatus from my hiatus for one last discussion on the Acts of Cain by Matthew Stover with one Drew McCaffrey from Inking Out Loud. Drew, how you doing?
Oh, I just finished reading CAINE'S LAW.
As did I. You finished it earlier today, sometime in the afternoon. I finished it literally, let's see, where we at? 15 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And it took me a while. I texted you. I said, I think I'm about an hour out. We'll be able to record at this time. And that turned out to be way more on the money than I suspected, because I kept slowing down. I slowed way, way down toward the end as I kept taking notes upon notes upon notes. So Drew, I've got thoughts. All right.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to those. But first I will remind everybody to go check out the Legendarium.com, where there have been a couple of people doing yeoman's work to get the website back in working condition. I know it hasn't been the best website in the world up to now, or at least, not in the last couple of years. It's been neglected. So we're working on it. So the Legendarium.com, go check it out. Go check out, the links actually work, et cetera, et cetera. You can join the conversation, find us on Discord, the Legendarium on Discord, and then also patreon.com/Legendarium, and also patreon.com/Inking Out Loud. Am I right? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Inking Out Loud. You will be able to find all of these episodes in either place. We're also going to do something a little bit different for this, because in honor of Inking Out Loud and in honor of Drew making me read all of this, we'll get to what it is. All of this, Acts of Cain stuff. We're going to do a, what do you call it, Drew? The final draft at the end of this episode. So this is not a normal Legendarium thing. I can't remember if we did this for any of the previous Legendarium episodes for this, but
I don't think so. Not for the Cain books.
Okay, but we're doing it today. The final draft. Drew and I are both big beer nerds, and so we will display what we've been drinking during this episode at the end of it. So stick around for that, and it will be thematically relevant. The last note before we get started is spoilers ahoy. This is the final episode of the 4 books that we have so far, Drew, of the Acts of Cain. So we've done 8 episodes. This is our 8th episode. And so if you're with us up to this point, then great. You probably already know this. But just in case, yes, we are going to talk probably at the very beginning of the episode about the end of this freaking book. There's a lot to get into, and we're not going to pull any punches. So if you haven't finished it, go finish it. And then as you are reeling about trying to figure out what the hell you just read, you can come back and listen to the episode. All right, Drew, what the hell did I just read?
Join me, Craig, upon the murky paths of guesswork.
So maybe let's lay the groundwork. Let's set the scene a little bit, which is a gripe that I do have now after 4 books of Stover. But we can get there in just a minute. Let's set the scene. We've got Cain at the beginning-ish of this book, captured, tied to a prison bed, like a hospital/prison bed, and injected with the black oil of the blind god. Thus begins something. And what we get, I know I mentioned this in our previous episode, the part 1 on Inking Out Loud for this book, where we're getting vignettes. You get scenes, here's the horse witch, and here's something going on with Angvas, Claylock, and here's something in his hospital bed, whatever. And none of it makes any freaking sense. And you just have to read each chapter like it's its own little tiny story and hope that he kind of ties it all together in the end. Whether he did so or not, I jury's out. Like I said, I just finished it. I'm still not totally sure what I just read. But Cain is out on a mission to rework the world order of two worlds simultaneously by destroying certain gods, elevating others, creating new ones, and acting as what the iron fist of the one who remains, the gatekeeper.
Yep.
Oh my gosh! So is that's essentially the bones of what we're dealing with, right? Am I missing any like
Yeah.
big things that are going on?
No, that's pretty much it in the broadest strokes. Obviously, there's a lot of intricate detail that goes into this that is not at all straightforward.
Which I didn't get into because I don't understand it.
Yeah, like that overview makes the book sound pretty straightforward. Like it's like this is what happened.
Sure,
it is the events of the book.
Yep.
but also,
yeah.
It is a winding and labyrinthine path to get there. So it's funny as a rereader. This is now the 5th time that I have read CAINE'S Law. I actually find the first half of the book pretty straightforward, with the benefit of hindsight and lots of discussion like this with other people, with other readers, with Stover himself. The second half of the book still sometimes gives me fits where when you're describing these chapters as vignettes, I'm looking at them as each chapter is a puzzle piece.
Sure.
And you're like, how do these all fit together to tell a story?
Yeah.
And there are still a couple pieces in the second half of the chapter where I'm like, I vaguely see where this is fitting in the puzzle, but I don't know how to perfectly get it to connect. And there are things, and I think this is deliberate on Stover's part, there are things that could potentially connect in multiple different ways. Because he wants, this is something that came out of our conversation with him on Inking Out Loud. He doesn't want to be the prescriptivist author. He's never going to have the kind of Q&A base that someone like Brandon Sanderson or Robert Jordan had, where he's answering all the fan questions. Yeah. Even Robert Jordan, he coined the read and find out thing, where even when he knew you weren't going to get to read and find out, he would say that because he didn't want to answer a question. He wanted to leave it up for theory and debate.
Sure.
But Stover is more extreme about that. He's like, I don't want to give you the answers. I want you to read my book and develop your own answers.
I theoretically, I absolutely respect that. I was actually reminded toward the end of this book of a Brandon Sanderson quote from The Way of Kings, when Wit tells Kaladin, a storyteller's job, the job of a storyteller, however he puts it, is not to tell you what to think, but to give you questions to think upon. This is not Wit's advice is not advice that Brandon necessarily always takes.
Right.
But I thought of that a lot as I was reading, especially the last 50 or so pages of this book, where he's giving you a whole lot to think about and not telling you precisely what to think. At least if you're paying attention. I suppose if you're not really paying close attention, you might think that he's leading you toward this or that thought, but no, that's you. That's you coming to that conclusion, not necessarily Stover giving it to you.
Yeah, right? And I think there's another thing, especially in those last 50 or so pages, he's giving you a lot to feel and letting you figure out how you want to feel about it. There is a great deal of emotion packed into those last couple chapters.
Yeah. Well, expound on that a little bit. We're going full spoiler territory, so whoever's listening now better have read it. Let me know what you think or why you say that.
Yeah, so we have 2 straight chapters. They're the 4th to final and 3rd to final. The Horsewitch 4, Horse Time, and the Now of Always 10, Reasons for Peasants. And Horse Time is the chapter in which the Horsewitch tells the sort of man.
We'll just call him Cain for
the
now.
Story of the girl who died in the stable fire.
Good Lord. That was a heck of a chapter.
Yeah. And then Reasons for Peasants is back to the point of view of Duncan talking with the Horsewitch. And I mean, it this is right after Duncan has been given that vision of Cain and the Horsewitch talking about the girl who died in the stable fire. And it's just, it's this beautiful scene that he sets at the start. Cain and Mylkoth converse softly some distance away. Chris and Ongvas walk together idly among the trees. The Horsewitch braids her garland, and Duncan finally gets it. Ah, he sighs into the dappled green. Ah, of course. And there's, a little bit, and then he says, so it really is all about the girl. Brings it full circle back to Heroes Die, when it's all about the girl. But now it's a much more profound version of that. And it reveals depths to Duncan and his relationship with Hari. It reveals depths to Hari himself and his own philosophy and what really is, one of the possible interpretations of the title of this book. There's just so much emotion packed into it, and I particularly love how he uses the Horsewitch to deflect the emotion instead of reveling in it. So he really makes the reader, like, you have to engage with the emotion, whatever emotion you feel from this, because depending on how you read the book, depending on your opinions of some of these characters, you might have a few different feelings here. He doesn't tell you this is how you're supposed to feel. He doesn't have the Horsewitch like get maudlin or super romantic or whatever. She's very kind of placid about the whole thing, and in her typically Horsewitch way, secretive. And so it's the same way that when you're talking about he gives you lots to think about but doesn't tell you how to think about them. Here he gives you lots to feel and doesn't tell you what to feel.
Yeah, I like that. I'll tell you one thing I felt, and this goes to another like cross-cultural quote, not cross-cultural, but whatever, you know what I mean. Cross-pop cultural quote. That chapter, and those moments with the Horsewitch and Duncan finally understanding and her explaining to him who Hari is, who Cain really is, reminded me a lot of Tommy Lee Jones. All right. One of there's the look I was looking for when I said that. No, there's a quote I think about often from Men in Black, the 1997 whatever action comedy. You saw it, right? I assume you've seen Men in Black.
Yeah, I've seen the first. Are there only two, or are there more? I've seen the first two.
There's like 4 or 5 now.
Oh, okay. I've seen the first 2 twice each, but it's been forever.
So there's a scene when he's recruiting Will Smith's character in the first movie, and they're having a conversation on a park bench. Will Smith has been told about the existence of aliens and whatnot, and he looks over at Tommy Lee Jones and says, well, why don't you just tell people? People are smart. And Tommy Lee Jones looks at him. Do you remember what he says? He says, a person is smart. People are dangerous, stupid, panicky animals, and you know it.
Yes.
I thought of that. That quote, I've been thinking about that for the last 25 years. Like that has been a very interesting thing for me to ruminate upon for a long, long time. But when she says to Duncan that Cain, or no, she explains to Duncan, I don't like horses. I don't really like horses. And he says, what? Wait, what? You're the Horsewitch. You have this giant herd around you. You care for them, whatever. So he looks at her like, what? She goes, I don't really like horses. They're dumb. They're brutish. They'll kill you just as soon as look at you. Horses are not what I love. But there was this one horse with a scar just above its eye. And that horse, I loved it for this reason. There was another one, and I loved that horse for this reason. I loved these things about these horses. And she likens that to Cain and says Cain loves more than your typical person maybe is capable of or allows themselves to, or whatever the case may be. Cain loves. It's just that he loves specifically rather than collectively. It's not that he loves people. In fact, if you asked him, he would say he hates people. He acts like he hates people. But with individuals, even the individuals who are supposedly his enemies, he loves those people individually for who they are, for what they are. And oh man, did that just, get me to my core. I love that concept because I think we're going to get into some of the political philosophy of the book, but I think that moment, more than the way that he writes about the governments of the world or the BOG, right, the Board of Governors, more than the way he talks about the actual functioning of politics in the world, that scene, I feel, explains Stover better than the other ones that you might be more quick to point to, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. It reminds me of I can't remember if it was in Cain Black Knife or even in the first half of Cain's Law, but when we were doing our episode there, you made a comment that he had, you'd kind of realize that he had kind of abandoned all the political philosophy and the economic talk and the stuff that we dug so deeply into on, in that chapter 0 episode for Blade of Tyshal. And this is why. Like, that stuff feels elementary when you're comparing it to a scene like this. We're talking about your 3 levels theory. Reading this, level 3 feels a heck of a lot higher than level 2 right now.
And it's sorry, go on.
Well, and so it really is the whole underpinning of this series. He wants to make some points here and there about political philosophy, cultural philosophy, but the most important thing is the personal philosophy side of it. Now, do I fully agree with the personal philosophy side of it? Not so much. I have problems with some of the conclusions, some of the apologies made for things in this. The idea of the forgiveness and permission witch
gets a little hairy.
It does. I can get behind a forgiveness witch. I don't know if I can get behind a permission witch.
It's, it reminds me, now that you're talking about it, I hadn't thought about it in these terms before we recorded, but ever since I was a little kid, I mean, you and I grew up in the 90s, and so people who are within about, say, 10 years of us, I'm sure, I don't know if kids now are getting this in elementary school, but you'll remember, what was the old cartoon thing? You're perfect just the way you are.
Oh, yes.
The Mr. Rogers ethos, the whatever. It's there's a lot to love. I'm the last guy to crap on Mr. Rogers' legacy. What a lovely man. Okay, that is not my intent here. But there's that idea, that cultural idea that we imbibed for so long, that like everything that you are is perfect just the way it is. And that's the way you should be now and forever.
Yep.
Right? And it kind of
brings me back to, man, this was such a generational thing. Like, I'm sure when you had end of year, field day in middle school or high school, and everybody's signing your yearbook.
Yeah.
How many people wrote never change?
Never change. Yeah, absolutely. Never change. And I always hated that ever since I was a little kid, because that was out of one side of their mouths, they being, society, teachers, parents, whoever, out of one side of their mouth, they're saying, you are perfect just the way you are. Love yourself, never change, whatever. And on the other side, they're saying, grow, improve, and learn and be better, strive, all those things. And it's like, well, which one is it? And personally, so when you talk about the forgiveness and permission, which the whole philosophy there seems to be, well, you're Cain. You're the iron fist of whatever God you're working for today. It's who you are. You are violence. You are that clenched fist. So at the end of the story, we're given a situation where Cain has he gets some kind of forgiveness, but really what that forgiveness from the Horsewitch is forgiveness from himself and permission to be exactly who he has always been. And I do not love that is permission for him to not improve, to not strive, to not be better. Is that fair?
Yes. I think it gets a little complicated because if we look at Cain, certainly from 25 years ago until now, but also from Heroes Die until now, I do think he got better. I do think he improved.
Sure.
We see introspection, we see growth, especially in Cain Blackknife when he's returning to Perthan's Ford. We see it in his interactions with Gail Keller and Simon Fowler. It's one of those, like, you kind of have to watch his actions rather than his words things, because he's still super rude to Gail Keller. Like, he's calling him we're on Legendarium, so I won't repeat the word. But at the same time, he's showing him mercy. He's giving him an opportunity and a way out, and he's saying, like, look, we'll get your cancer fixed. And, this is a guy who 2 books ago, he would have happily, joyfully murdered with his bare hands, and now he's like, you don't deserve to die this way. You don't deserve to be cast to the winds.
Is that what he says?
The way that it's not what he says. It's what he does.
So I'm not sure I read Cain the same way.
Ooh.
What I saw in him was the utilitarian streak of saying, like, okay, normally I would kill you, but here that doesn't accomplish. This doesn't accomplish what I need accomplished. So is it that he, has more pity or mercy for Gail Keller or Gail? Yeah, is it Gail Keller? Is it that? I read it more as, well, this isn't going to help anything. So this isn't going to accomplish anything, so I'm not going to do it.
I think that is a self-justification because Cain has to be himself for himself. It's always a show. It's always an act.
Right.
And even sometimes it is, in fact, most of the time it's for himself. And I think that's his justification to himself for not being the act. But this is one of those things. Stover doesn't tell you this is what it is.
Right.
He shows you things and allows you to arrive at your own conclusions. Now, this is something, like I said, I may be more sympathetic toward, Cain's attitude here than you are, because I'm biased. I think Cain is a really fascinating character and I enjoy reading him. I want him to have made at least some small steps, even though very clearly he's still a bad person. I mean, like, the last chapter you get from him, he's saying, like, I'm evil.
Yeah.
He's talking to the Board of Governors. He's like,
did you not get this yet?
Evil. Yeah, like, but again, I would like to read that as him just performing for the Board of Governors here and recognizing that, like, yeah, I'm not a good person, but I need to act worse than I am and play on my history in order to make a point. But you know, but either way you cut it, going back to the horse witch, as you know, I was calling it the forgiveness and permission witch. It's the idea of like forgiving you for the things in your past, whether they're things you did or, more importantly, the things that were done to you. Stop blaming yourself for the things that were done to you.
Yeah.
And then permission to be who you are. And I can really get behind the forgiveness side of it, and permission to an extent, but I think it's brought to such an extreme here at the end. And then it's kind of reinforced with the love note, where it feels like Stover is using Cain's specific and very powerful love to excuse a lot of the horrible things he does to people.
Right.
And this feels a little bit like the other side of the coin of Cersei Lannister in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Sure.
Where she does all of these horrible things for the sake of the people she intensely and specifically loves. But she's portrayed much less sympathetically than Cain is here.
Right.
And so when you're coming down to it, how much difference is there other than framing?
Is there even a difference in intent? I'd have to think about it. I'm not sure where I would come down with these two characters that you're drawing the parallel with.
Very often, it's not like the people Cersei Lannister is opposing are particularly good people.
Well, this is A Song of Ice and Fire, after all.
Exactly.
What is a good person, says George Martin? I've never met one. No, I think this point, the forgiveness and permission, really works well with Duncan. And oh boy,
yes.
I haven't. Okay, Drew, can we go all the way back to the first time when we're chatting with
Scott Lynch?
Yeah, with Scott Lynch about Heroes Die. And I said, my favorite chapter is chapter 5 of Heroes Die. I think that was the one where he's talking to his dad in the Buke, right? And here we have Duncan. He's not being portrayed as the protagonist or the hero of the whole story, but he is given his moment in the sun, philosophically at least, where Cain says you cannot hold him accountable for what happened to me and my mother when I was young, because Duncan Michelson would never hurt a fly. But Duncan Michelson wasn't in control of those fists. Duncan Michelson wasn't the one who decided to do those things. So it hits really well, this idea of forgiveness and permission for Duncan to be who he is, because he's freed from that body that was causing him such problems. And now he is himself, right? In Cain's case, it becomes more problematic because he never lost agency. And that's where it gets problematic for me, because Cain, if we forget Cain for a second, if we all just look in ourselves or look at our past actions and say, that's who I am, sorry, forgiveness and permission, right? Here I go, being me. That's problematic. There are cases where that's going to come up. Duncan's being a good illustration of one. But for most of us, most of the time, it's no, you did not have to do that thing. You could have chosen differently. And so that's what, with Cain, it's like, you did not have to kill X person, right? You did not have to do that. You chose to do it. Anyway, so, you go.
He gets so close. Like he gets into this kind of self-reflective evaluation of his life and who he is metaphysically in this new reality where he is not just Cain, he is the living embodiment of the metaphysical sort of man. And he starts talking about, like, I don't like hurting people. I like hurting people who are in charge. I killing people who have the ability to make the world better and refuse to do so. And then he gets so close to like taking that next step, and because he says all the times in my life that life really dumped on me were when I became the people I hate, were when I killed people who didn't fall in this category.
Yeah.
But then he kind of just brushes past it and says, well, but you know what? I'm not going to be the person that I want these people to be. I'm going to be the person who punishes them. And it's like,
oh man.
But
we should.
Okay. I want to talk about one thing though before we move on, because it has come up several times.
Okay.
Do you know what the original title of this book was supposed to be?
Forgiveness and Permission. I don't know.
His Father's Fist.
Oh shit. Oh, sorry. Oof. Okay. Wow.
I think that is an incredible title. And it fits so well. However, when we talked with Matt about it, he was like, it's an incredible title if you've already read the book.
Right. It's not going to pull you in. And it could be somewhat disturbing.
but taking that idea around, looking at it in hindsight, how many times have you brought up Cain being a fist? How many times have you brought up Duncan's fists? Like it's all over the story. The title may have changed, but it's still the spirit of this book. And again, like on that idea of forgiveness, especially when it comes to Duncan's fists, if you could take back the worst thing you ever did, if you could change things so that the worst thing you ever did wasn't done by you, you know, like when the moment you said back on that episode with Scott Lynch that the scene with Duncan Michelson was your favorite, I was like, you're going to love where this goes.
I'm still working out where I feel like this went. You and I talked, and I really hope people go listen to it. You do have to be a patron of either show, and it is either show. It is on both Patreon feeds. But we did an episode for, was it the chapter 0, or did we do another additional episode about the philosophy, the political philosophy of like chapter 15 of Blade of Taishal?
I think it was chapter 17, but yeah, we did both.
Whatever it was. Yeah, whatever it was. We got a lot into the political philosophy and kind of the libertarian shadings of the book at the time, and wondering, where Matthew Stover was trying to go with it and what he was trying to say. And that, boy, did that rear its head again at the end of book 4, right? And so I should just mention, people can go listen to our discussions about that, and where my head was at the time. But as I got to the end of this book, as I got toward the end of this book, I started thinking to myself, it's not libertarian. I mean, that's a kind of specific word that we have for a pretty specific type of political philosophy these days. It's more liberal in the classical understanding of the word, like the good Scottish Enlightenment version of the word liberal, right? That's what we were talking about with the whole Horsewitch speech about loving individuals and not groups. You don't punish and you don't love a group. You punish or reward or love or hate a person, an individual, for specific things or reasons, right? And that the indispensable unit of humankind is the individual, not the group, not the collective. Not that those things don't matter or whatever, but the classical liberal philosophy would say it begins with the individual, right? And then he starts to get into that with the whole punishing those who don't make the world a better place. They view other people as tools or sheep or cattle or whatever to prop up their own power or their own wealth or whatever. And how
Yeah.
dare you? And you're the ones that I hate. You're the ones that I love to kill. Okay, so great. We're right in line with that philosophy. And the end scene, before we get to epilogues and prologues and all that, that's weird. But the final bit is him saying, my law, if you want to live, you specifically, if you want to live, you will obey my rules, and my rules are as follows. And it's kind of like a very Cain-ish way of saying a lot of those things. Don't mess with me, don't mess with my family, don't mess with anybody else, just, be good and I won't kill you. And that's where it kind of like, oh shoot, it's falling apart because the idea here is no longer a liberal society where people are able to do as they will, strive or chill as they might. It's my way or the highway. You will live in a good society or I will kill you. And so it's like the whole book, or I should say the whole ending of the book, is leading up to this like kind of liberal ideal. And then he grabs it in that iron Cain fist of his and says, and you'll fucking like it.
It is in and of itself an ultimate refutation of Cainism.
Yes, exactly. And which we have talked about before, but it's never been driven home quite like it was at the end of this book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know. Thoughts and feelings?
I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you said there. It's in a lot of ways, this is a book of contradictions. And in structural ways, in thematic ways, in character ways, in, narrative ways. It leads off with a note about how, like, things in this are getting unhappened. Even what you just brought up. The book ends with a prologue. And it's a prologue very clearly, like, if you were to read that before reading the rest of this book, you'd be like, oh, okay. That would provide a lot of context, in fact, for...
You just know you've got Adam Sandler in your head going, once again, information that would have been useful to me yesterday.
It's a very... I'm going to make this comparison a lot. I have it. I have done so already, but it's a Gene Wolfe kind of thing to do. Like the appendix to The Shadow of the Torturer, the first volume of the Book of the New Sun, you are meant to read it after the book. But if you read it, you're like, wow, that would have been really good to know before I read the book. But on top of that, we talked last episode about the very opening scene.
Okay.
Beloved
Which, honestly,
of God.
like, at this point, I don't even remember. So you'll have to refresh my memory.
It's titled One Thin Slice of Forever, Beloved of God.
Hold up. I just got disconnected again.
I see you. You disconnected and you're back.
Yeah, I disconnected. I'm back. I think it's still recording. It says new track is being made. I think maybe the USB got bumped.
Oh, jeez.
It's finicky. It seems to still be recording. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I didn't get booted out of that.
Okay.
Anyway.
Sorry. What were you saying?
So that opening scene, One Thin Slice of Forever, Beloved of God, and in this my dream, beloved, you know me. Through your eyes, okay. I watch your blunt and broken hands, etc., etc. This book ends with a prologue. Does this scene really feel like an epilogue to you at the very beginning of the book? Sure seems like the end of something.
I honestly, I can't even respond to that. I'd have to go back and read it again.
So there's what I talked about last episode, that this is an unhappened instance of the events in Perthins Ford where after the Justice, Cain by himself climbs the spire to make a deal with the god, and everything goes to hell and all that. And he has redone it so that now in the version he wanted, the Justice doesn't happen. Like, Orbeck was actually a smoke hunt fetch. Angvas helped him, and then he and Angvas together ascend the spire and destroy the fist and the sword to create Duncan, etc., etc., etc. But there's a twist to this. When he goes into the Blackstone mining operation and he finds the Dil Talon, and he finds these legions of smoke hunt fetches and Kaigez, Orbeck's wife, underneath, and they have this showdown. And there's...
That was a great scene.
Oh, such a good scene.
I really liked that one.
And then there's a thing he mentions in it. He's like, there's a triple aspect down here. Something that is both, or not both, but all three of Krill, Pyraconth, and the Blind God.
The Blind God, yeah.
And it is Cromane from back in Retreat from the Bodecan. Her, like, shade was stuck in the Dil Talon, and she has the Fist of Krill on, and she's been the one facilitating contact with the Blind God and all of this. And he has this conversation with her, and boy, some of the terminology she uses sounds awfully like the terminology of this narrator in the opening.
Interesting.
And my theory here is that not only is this an unhappened instance, but this is an epilogue. This is Cromane kind of like in the ether afterward, dreaming her dream of what could have happened and how she could have achieved release instead of the events that Cain happens in this book.
Huh.
And this is why I said we're treading some murky paths here.
No kidding. It's yeah, you know, I'll have some complaints in a moment along those lines. Actually, you know what? No, I have stuff that I want to talk about as far as like stuff that I absolutely loved. But if it's okay, I want to mention, as I was reading through this second half of this book, and I mean, I kind of talked about it with the first one, or the first half, I should say. As the series has gone on, I have felt less and less sure-footed with the setting.
Oh, interesting.
So I get that a lot of that is probably intentional. Okay, so Matthew Stover does not seem like an unintentional kind of author to me. So, not to say there's nothing unintentional in the books, but I'm sure that he considered a lot about this sort of thing. And the longer we go on, we get to say that scene. This is actually the scene that made me finally go, oh, okay, wait, what? Because I didn't get where we were, who was there. And we're switching, like, as it switches to the next scene, it's like, wait, did we go somewhere else? Or are we still in that same, like, was that an underground cavern? Is this some kind of palace? So my complaint is that as amazing as he is, Stover, I mean, at writing characters, dialogue, philosophy, giving you those questions to think upon, as amazing as his prose styling is, and I do put it, I rank it extremely high. I needed more of a footing with setting for me to be able to even somewhat grok the story that I was reading. So is that fair? I mean, as I'm reading that scene, I'm going, wait, where am I? And what the hell is going on? Because I'm way out of my depth here. And I'm not a bad reader, okay? Like, I should have maybe more of a setting. I don't need him to hold my hand, you know, Sanderson style or whatever, but something a little more.
So I'll say I didn't have a problem with that sequence when I read it, but I'm not going to gainsay people who do, because, like you said, this book has jumped around so much. You can't just assume things,
right,
in terms of place and time. And there are context clues that, like, eventually I like more thoroughly picked up on, where certain, like the chapter titles give clues to, like, where and when and how these individual scenes are. But that particular segment is its own like chapter, not even subtitle, it's like a super title.
right.
It's the same timeline as the earlier chapters of Yesterday's Tomorrow, Meat Puppets and Intervention, where, like, Kane or Jonathan Fist is in Perthens Ford, and you know, there's, like, Weaver's Square and that incredible scene with Ongvas and all of that. That's the same timeline, but here it's under the super title of Devices and Maneuvers.
Okay.
And so it's not totally clear even with those context clues.
Right. So I'm going to compare this to Erickson for a minute. Because as some listeners know, I can't remember if I've ever mentioned this on the show. People have been bugging us to read Erickson for years and years, right? What's the name of that series?
Malazan, Book of the
Malazan. Malazan, or whatever
I've heard like 4 different pronunciations of that word.
Who gives a crap?
So
so I tried to read it. I've tried 3 times to read the first book, and I get about halfway, maybe 2/3 of the way through the book, and realize I don't know what's going on. I don't know who any of these people are, where they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it. I don't care. That's a DNF situation for me, where he does not give me enough to care. Stover doesn't do that, okay? But the comparison here is that, at least with setting, he's not giving me enough for me to really grasp on. So luckily, I do know who these characters are. I do know some of their motivations. I do get some of the scaffolding that the story is built on, right from the first 2 books. So I have enough to, like, grip the cliff face with my fingernails and hold on for dear life, but it's barely. I'll be honest, it's barely. So
there's a reason he did this in the 4th of 4 books, not in the first book.
Right.
Like,
so that's, if I have a complaint about the book, and we can get back to the amazing stuff, and believe me, I've got plenty of notes on that, but that's my big complaint. Say what you will.
I'm not going to argue with that. Like, that's extremely fair. That is this book. Like, it's one of those, in a very Cain-esque way. It's a totally unapologetic book where Stover's like, I'm going to do this, and that's how it is. Like, this is very clearly a thing. Like, he had been working his career toward doing. Like, he's a guy who very obviously is not going to settle for doing things the comfortable way. If you've read his Star Wars books, he doesn't write those the way every other expanded universe author writes them. And even within those books, they all 4 feel unique from each other. Like, he's just out there doing, like, crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, he knows that there are going to be people who read CAINE'S Law and don't like it. But he also knows that for people who do, and especially for people who like it enough to reread it, like me,
the rewards will be there.
Like, wow, you know, it's And that's why, like I mentioned last episode, this has become my favorite series of all time. Does not have my favorite ending.
Well, yeah, yeah. This is uh, we we often incorrectly use the word anticlimax. This is quite literally an anticlimax, right?
There's some cool stuff that
I'm
goes
not saying
down,
there's
but
not cool
so
stuff.
much of it is off
It's
screen.
well,
Like,
it's off screen and he undercuts it.
yeah,
He makes
correct.
the cool stuff happen and then he says F you for liking the cool stuff. Here's what I'm going to give you.
Hmm.
Right. So anyway, it's
I do love the spectacle of like Cain and Gale both like smashing their faces against the window to watch the dragons flying overhead. Like,
that is pretty good. That is pretty good. So yeah, no, there's cool stuff, but it's not a climax in the way that we're used to, especially
Mhm.
fantasy novels, but really novels generally typically have a different type of climax.
Yeah,
So,
and even like the what you would think of as the climactic conflict, the way so much of this book has been aiming toward is the justice. It's the showdown
yes.
between Orbeck and Ongvas, Black Knives and Knights of Krill, and then that just doesn't happen.
It's anticlimax.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, it's bold. I think in that particular instance, I thought he pulled it off really well. The way he inverts that scene and like makes it more about Cain and his relationships with these groups, where he brings it full circle. Once upon a time, he warned the Black Knives, and he made that place hell for them. Now he's warning the Knights of Krill, and he's making that place hell for them. And like it just, in that sense, it was a thematic climax,
right.
a cathartic moment, but in a more immediate narrative sense, it was an anticlimax.
It kind of flies in the face of any detective novel or story you've ever read, because you brought up the idea of these chapters, these vignettes or puzzle pieces, right? And
Yeah.
at the end of a detective novel, you have been given all those puzzle pieces, and then Inspector Poirot or whoever says, and here's how they all fit together. Here's the picture
Right.
for you, reader. And again, kind of like the idea of an anticlimax. Well, no, very, very much that idea of the anticlimax is him saying, okay, there's all the puzzle pieces. I'm out.
Yeah.
Peace. Right?
He just throws them in the air and he's like, see ya.
Exactly. It says, I'm out. Where the climax of the book, the final scene with him and Gail Keller, where he's talking to the Board of Governors, and the big reveal is, oh, I won weeks ago. You guys are all dead. Like that's I'm torn on it, because there's a part of me that really does like that, and then there's a part of me that's like, okay, so why did I read this? Everything is unhappening. The climax happened weeks ago, before the third book even started. Nothing matters. LOL. And so I'm torn. I am torn on the ending, Drew. That's all.
So what it is that climax doesn't matter, and that's why it wasn't in the book. That climax happened because of the things we saw in the actual text. He was able to win weeks ago because he had screwed with the timelines and unhappened things, and he had surrounded himself with the right people, with the right understandings and the right love and relationships and all of that. And so that's Stover saying it, and again, thematically full circle. In Heroes Die, he goes, yeah, you really love the violence. You should rethink that. And here he's like, I'm not going to give you the violence you wanted.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about filial emotion and trauma and like, yeah. So it works. It's just to go back to the puzzle metaphor, it's like you think the puzzle pieces have little rounded,
Right.
hooks like a normal one, and by the time you get there, they're a totally different shape entirely.
Yeah. This is the kind of thing where I wonder if, even before I ever reread the book, if I could listen to this episode in 3 months or so, or a month or whatever, and go, "Oh, you freaking idiot! You tried to talk about this after you finished it an hour earlier. You get a grip." Like I wonder if it will make more sense to me as I reflect on the story and get it a little bit better. That is possible. So
it very likely is. I will also say it's a good thing you read the book instead of listening to this one.
Oh yeah, no, that's I probably should have been doing that through this whole series. I would bounce in and out from reading and do audiobook and whatnot, and I wouldn't have made. I didn't make head or tails of this, but I would have lost a few limbs in the process if I tried to listen.
Just like when you said you had like whatever 30 pages left, and you said, yeah, give me like 45, 55 minutes to finish this off, and I was like, yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, you should be reading like what a normal clip. You're finishing a page every 20 to 30 seconds, maybe something like that. If you're reading at a good pace. And on this one, I'm like, yeah, that's sorry, no way, that's not happening, because this going back to something we were talking about earlier. If I were advising somebody who was reading these books, even going back to Heroes Die, but especially picking up with Blade of Taishal, my piece of advice would be, as you say, read it. Whoever, I can't remember the name of the guy who narrates it. He's
Stefan
fabulous,
Rudnicki.
Absolutely fabulous. This is not any way an indictment of him, but I would say don't listen, read it. Maybe you can listen to it later.
Yeah.
Read it first.
Exactly.
And read every freaking word. Slow down and read every single word and pay attention to every single word, because they're all going to come in.
Like that really is it. Like you have to think about what you're reading in this series.
Yeah.
And it takes a special writer to pull that off.
Drew, can we come crashing back down to earth and do some "hey, that was cool" moments?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay,
I've been waiting to talk about Tanner.
Oh gosh, I want to talk about James Cameron, and the Terminator. So there was a moment when, speaking of like, you don't get the violence, right? But we do. We get plenty of violence in this book.
Oh yeah.
There was a moment when I'm reading it. So I've got the, if anybody cares, I've got the trade paperback, and I'm on page 347. And there's a moment where, let's see, Angvas. He's talking to Angvas. Oh, he's talking about Ravenlock. Right. Oh man, there's another really cool character. Love Ravenlock. And he says, there is what a thing is thought to be. This is the Ravenlock. And there is what a thing is. And then he says this: you can't be intimidated. You can't be bargained with. You can't be diverted or persuaded or deceived. Your every gesture displays the elegance of pure destruction. And I read that and went, oh, he must have just watched the Terminator. Because do you remember that? Do you remember the original Terminator? When he says he's trying to explain to Sarah Connor the pile of, well, the pile of garbage she's in, and he's explaining what a Terminator is, and he says it can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, it doesn't know, it doesn't show mercy or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. And I read that from Ravenlock, and I went, oh, he just watched Terminator. I just know it. He says, what does he say? You can't be intimidated, et cetera, et cetera. I love that. And your every gesture displays the elegance of pure destruction. I love that. What a line. So yeah, that's that was one of those. Oh yeah, that was totally badass. I love that. So that's again, crashing down to earth and just saying, what a great line.
No, but that's the beauty of this. Like, I've read some other, like Gene Wolfe, for instance, or I'm actually currently reading the second book in the Second Apocalypse series by Scott Baker. The Warrior Prophet. The first book is The Darkness That Comes Before. Beautiful prose, dark, very philosophically involved. But Baker doesn't have the ability to bring it crashing down in this satisfying way that Stover does. He doesn't have the immediacy of just fun entertainment. Like, there's nothing funny in Second Apocalypse. Like, you know, and like I said, I want to talk about Tanner because what a character.
Okay, go for it.
And I mean that not just in the sense of like, oh, he's literally a character on a page.
Right,
I mean, like,
right.
if you met that guy, you'd be like, man, what a character.
So he's a fabulous, the best actor we've ever met, the best assassin we've ever met. Am I missing anything? Maybe the funniest character we've met.
His repartee with Cain is just.
Is that because
kiss.
It's Cain on Cain? Like he out Cain's Cain with his
basically
with his verbiage.
Although Cain does beat him 1-on-1.
Ish. Kind of.
I mean, yeah, Cain definitely walks away injured, but he beats him.
He
could have killed him
in the hills where Orbeck is helping him out.
Uh-huh.
I didn't think that he beat him. I thought he only won because Orbeck was there.
Well, yeah, but that's Cain though. He plays dirty.
Yeah, there you go.
But I love the callback. Am I allowed to read this off on the Legendarium?
You know what?
About when he asks him his name.
I'm gonna have to go through this whole episode with a whole lot of editing. I'll just bleep it. Go for it.
Okay. So the first time he asks him, you know, hey, like they're having the conversation, the back and forth, and Fist waved it off. Listen, I don't care what your real name is, and he interrupts and goes, "You can call me Haywood, Lord Jablomi, Marquess of Jamet, and the 11th Earl of Up Your Ass." Yeah, okay, what are we, 12 years old? How's your wrist? Broken. How's your sucking chest wound? Like, just the back and forth is so good. And then again later, even after they're working together, and Cain's about to send him through the Dill to Earth, and he's like, hey, just one last question, because I'm never going to see you again. What's your name? And he's like, yeah, I guess there's no harm. And he starts repeating the whole, you can call me Haywood, Lord, and he just vanishes in light.
That was pretty good. I did like that bit.
It cracks me up. Like, again, Stover's aware of it. He's like, yeah, what are we, 12 years old here? But
it's, there might be something more here. Because, yes, it's hilarious. And I got a good chuckle out of that moment as well. But this whole book, the entire book, is a very long meditation on names and what they mean and who we really are. And so in that hilarious departure of Tanner, there may be a point to be made there where he says, you know, hey, it's over. It doesn't matter. You're not hiding anymore, at least not from me. Just tell me your name.
Yeah.
And he won't do it. Because, I mean, it's a trope as old as fantasy itself, right? Names hold power. But there might be something a little deeper there. I'd have to think on that. I love that bit, though.
Especially because his character, in many, many ways, is a metaphorical middle finger to Cain.
Right. Oh, yeah, you thought you were good. Oh, and there was, speaking of Tanner, so we have this whole book where... he has a few scenes where it's clear that he's not invincible. He's not the best. Mm-hmm. You know, Tanner could basically kick his ass in a fair fight, right? So we have that. And then at the very, very end of the book, there's that bit where he says, you know, I was always best when I was performing. And he's having the performance of his life, and it is the best he's ever been. And when he's in the hills with Tanner and Orbeck getting his butt whipped, he's not performing for anybody, right? And
no,
he gets it handed to him. So that's something else interesting to think about.
So another character we got to talk about is
Okay.
Ongvas.
Sure. Ongvas Claylock, the champion, so-called supposed champion of Krill.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to say?
Outside of Cain, excluding Cain, she's my favorite character in this series.
Interesting. Okay.
She is so much fun. In the first half of this book, and really in the bits we get of her in Cain Black Knife, she has this weight of sadness to her.
Mm.
But once Cain kind of unlocks what she is and connects with her, she becomes fun. First off, I love her diction.
Yes.
Like, Cain rubs off on her, but she retains this elevated diction. Maybe one of my favorite lines in the whole book is after Cain like goes in and like beats up the guy who was abusing his horse, and he's outside, helping the horse and all that, and Ongvas comes back out and she's like, Krill's love has restored his arm as well the other's burns. He goes, yeah, thanks. And then he looks over and she's got like a whole beer keg
yes, over her shoulder.
And he goes, I see Krill's love has also restored your beer supply. And she says, and I have yet to assay its quality, which is as well. Alcohol seems to make me disinclined to overlook the imperfections of others.
Yeah, that line jumped out. Gosh, that's so good.
The insult combined with the elevated diction is just beautiful.
Yeah, she is great.
Oh.
Especially if you take books 3 and 4 together, right? Then she becomes a much even more interesting character, I should say. And
going back to that scene where you're making the James Cameron Terminator reference, but when Ravenlock talks to her, and he just, oh my gosh, again, touching, emotional, where he's like, yeah, you remind me of Krill. And she gets, tears in her eyes and falls to her knees. And, she is a hero.
Right.
There are not a whole lot of pure heroes in this series, and she is one.
Yeah. It's spin-off time. Time for a really stock standard fantasy story from Stover, starring Ongvas Claylock.
So as I understand it, the sequel series he is planning on, you'll understand the name now. It's not the Acts of Cain, it's the Age of Cain.
Oh, sure. Yeah, wow, okay.
And Faith is going to be one of the main characters.
Oh, interesting. That could... Okay, all right. I'll mull on that. That could be good. All right. Let's do... Drew, we've been going for a little over an hour already. I want to wrap up with a few more thoughts. We did our
sure.
Hey, those lines were fun. Those characters were fun. I want to do a little bit more stuff that made me think. And then we can wrap up with a little bit of final draft. So I'm going to skip to page 444 in my trade paperback. So this is in the chapter Reasons for Peasants.
Oh boy, here we go.
And I want to see if I can find the actual line. I know it's on this page because I marked it, but I didn't actually put it down. Okay. All right. I know better than to argue with you, but I want to. He's talking to the horse witch. Mm-hmm. I want to deny it. I wish I could make that unhappen. He deserves better. If you mean by deserve what I think you mean, everyone does. Oh, man. Okay, that line hit me pretty hard because this is actually it's a little bit of a pet issue of mine where we sometimes use certain words without actually thinking about what they mean. And I loved that line so much. I'll tell you a little story. Gosh, this would have been, what the heck month is it? So this would have been like a year ago or something. Sarah, my wife, and I, we were doing couples therapy. No need to freak out anybody. This I compare it to a car. This is maintenance, not repairs, right? So we do couples therapy every now and then just to make sure we're having good conversations and all this. And the thing that this last therapist did that drove me absolutely up the wall was using the words deserve and need in ways that were obviously unconsidered. And I just hate that. And so I think Stover and I could sit down and have a really interesting conversation. I wonder what he would have to say and if it would be in line with what I would have to say. Based on this line, I think we would be pretty simpatico about the word deserve, because we all deserve certain things just by virtue of, being alive, and we all don't deserve certain things by virtue of being alive. And we throw that word around a little too willy-nilly, and it's a judgment laden word where, essentially, who am I to say who does or doesn't deserve whatever thing outside the bounds of what I was just talking about, human dignity and rights and all that stuff. But anyway, and then need is the other one. I've always hated that. Oh, well, it's I have needs, or I need this thing. It's like, you better be careful with that word, because you probably don't need it. Anyway, so I thought, as this was going on, man, I'm jealous of Drew, or I'm envious of Drew, I should say, that you got to chill with Stover for a little while on Inking Out Loud and have a conversation. I would love to just talk to him for an hour about a few words that he uses here and there throughout his books, and just dig into what he thinks about them.
He's the kind of guy that I'd really love to run into at the bar at a convention.
Yeah.
And just sit there and talk.
That would be pretty good.
Yeah. So I had one line that made me really think. And this is when Palace Rill is talking with Duncan. And she kind of does the same thing as the Horsewitch, at least immediately. And, she says, "I can ease your pain." And he goes, "It doesn't hurt." She says, "Not the pain of your flesh." And he says, "But without that pain, I wouldn't know who I am." And she says, "Is that a dreadful fate? I tell you now, forgetting is calm and quiet, without suffering, without fear, without desire, only rest." And on its surface, that's an easy thing to read and go well, yeah, I don't want to forget myself or lose my identity. Nobody wants that.
Oh,
but I stopped and I started thinking about that more, and how my gut reaction is wrong. So many people do want that. And so much of what has become modern culture encourages that mindset. The abandonment of self into other things. And whether it's, seeking oblivion through substance use, or seeking detachment through reckless media consumption. I mean, you hear about stories of kids who were hospitalized or died because they were just playing video games for 3 days straight.
Right.
So much of our life is addictively detaching from ourselves. And this line really kind of gave me pause. And and in and of itself, as I'm reading a book, this is something that I've really struggled with my whole, I would say, academic life when it comes to reading, is the contrast between reading for escapism and reading for purpose. And how I remember railing against, in fact, I wrote a college essay for one of my literature courses about how, look, sometimes books can just be read for fun. We don't have to go all the way deep into this.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've gotten further into my life as a reader, and especially as a writer, I'm rebelling against myself and that opinion. Where, yes, reading should be fun. Reading can provide escapism, but reading solely for escapism, I'm going to piss off a lot of people right now. I think reading solely for escapism is dangerous, because it's not improving yourself. It's mindless consumption. We should be reading books to improve ourselves and to learn. And sometimes that learning is going to be uncomfortable.
Or at least consider. Right.
Yeah. It's not calm. It's not quiet. It's not without suffering, without fear or desire. It is not rest. Reading is not rest. So that was like my kind of like
I think
exhalation coming out of that line.
Directionally, I'm with you. I'm not sure that I come down as absolute as what you just said. But this is something. Okay, well, it's a day that ends in ends in Y. So I'm going to invoke Tolkien here. And this was a thing that drove him crazy, was when fans would get lost in his works. And he did not like that idea. I mean, his whole thing was, fairy is like the forest, and the hobbits are leaving the Shire and they're going into the forest. And this is like, it's the wide, scary world of story and fairy tale. And his whole point was, yeah, you should go there. You need to go there. You must go through those things. But Bilbo goes there and back again. Yeah. He goes home with the learning, right? You know, Frodo and Sam and the others, they go home having learned something. So again, I think directionally I'm with you. You do not want to get lost in, you don't want to use books as a way to avoid life. They should be a way to engage with life. Is that a fair summation of what you're saying?
Yeah, and a way to improve your engagement with life.
Right. So, yeah, that being said, I do think that there's room for the occasional, like, pure fun book. So I'm not sure I'm as absolute as you are with that, but I like a lot of what you say. So
I mean, this is definitely a personal preference thing, although obviously I have opinions on it in general. But thinking back, it has played out in this way where I have picked up books over the last few years that people are like, oh, this is just like a fun popcorn read. Like, there's nothing deep here. It's just like action. You can lose yourself in the story. And I read it and I'm like, I didn't like that book. Yeah. Sometimes I say stronger things than that.
Like what, Drew? Don't say it. All right. One more point. Gosh, I've got like 3 or 4, but we've really got to start wrapping this up.
We could talk about this book for 3 hours.
And you know what? And you and I probably will. And people won't be privy to that. Ha, ha, ha. We have our own lives. We're not just podcasters. Okay. So there's one more concept that I thought kind of fed into the rest of the book. And the timeline is so jumbled, I shouldn't say the rest of the book from there. I should say like back, two books or whatever. But there's a moment you brought up the justice. This is the fight, right? Yeah. Where he goes down into the pit and et cetera. You've read it. You know what I'm talking about. And he's talking to Markham, who is the knight, just the horrible, worst. Awful. Yeah, he's the worst. And Markham has had a pretty sweet setup up to this point because Angvas has been the champion of Krill. And so she gets all of the responsibility to go along with her supernatural powers and all that stuff. He doesn't have to take any responsibility. He gets the supernatural powers and he gets to just kind of like, it reminds me of people crap on CEOs a lot. Well, I've met a few CEOs in my day, and for the most part, they're just regular, hardworking, normal people. It's the board. It's the people. It's the CEO's bosses that you're like, what do you do for us here? And I know that's not fair. But sometimes the thought crosses your mind. Anyway, so she's the CEO. He's on the board. He's what do you call the Knights of Krill. They've got like their governing board.
So he's not directly on the board. So they're like the Lords Legendary.
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
He is a Lord Righteous. He was like the right-hand man of one of the Lords Legendary.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, you can tell how much I really figured all that stuff out. Whatever. The point remains. So if Cain loses the fight, then Orbeck becomes the leader of the Black Knives, or, the fetch of Orbeck becomes the leader of the Black Knives, and Markham becomes the leader of the Knights of Krill, or the champion of Krill. And there's this line that just reached out and grabbed me and made me kind of consider everything that had happened in the story and everything that would happen. And he says, let's see, come on, I won't repeat the word. What are you afraid of? Losing or winning?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Because, if you win, you'll be champion and he'll be Quachar and you two sissies will get to stage your precious freaking pillow fight. That line, and that when you consider that with how he talks to the Board of Governors, the others watching in the epilogue, prologue, whatever it was, the epilogue, I guess, that it's kind of what he's saying. You've coasted, you've taken other people's work and turned it to your advantage, and you have lived this life of luxury where you haven't had any of the responsibility of leadership. You've just had the benefits of leadership. And this line hit really hard because, to your point just a moment ago, books are supposed to tell us something. And I'm going to go ahead and do something I don't normally do on this podcast and call out pretty much all of American culture specifically and Western culture generally, and say we have a massive problem with people who are addicted to losing because it gets them off the hook. And I'm not just talking about our leaders, I'm talking about all of us. We have a culture where we are more comfortable with losing than with winning because it means we don't have to be in charge. We don't have to take responsibility. And if that's you, stop it. You should want to do the right thing. You should want to fight for what you believe in. You should want to win and take responsibility for that winning, and and expand your sphere of influence and do right by the world. And that line hit me really hard, and then I kept thinking of that as he went on in that epilogue. There you go. Soapbox smashed. I'm done.
All right, we both pissed off large segments of the audience.
Yeah, and
for different reasons.
Yeah, that could be. That's fine. You know what? You can hit me up on Discord. That's cool. So yeah. Maybe that's the point where we should leave this. Any final thoughts before we get to our final draft?
Did you like the series?
I loved the series. I just am still working on how much I like individual aspects of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Heroes Die. I'm sorry. That's in the pantheon of the all-time greats. What a book. And then he tears it apart for 3 books running. And so, but for me, that doesn't necessarily take away from what a good book that really was. Blade of Taishal, let's just say that's maybe the most book I have ever read. And I'm not talking about page count or word count. That is just the most book I have ever read. And so there is no, I think if somebody came to me and said, I like Blade of Taishal, that would raise my eyebrows. If you say, I love Blade of Taishal, I will accept that much more readily.
Ooh, okay.
It's
I understand that sentiment.
Yeah. And then the other two, I'm still working out how I feel about 3 and 4. So
yeah, which really are 2 halves of one whole.
Exactly.
It's the act of violence, the act of war, and the act of atonement.
So, yeah, ultimately, jury is out on how much, but yeah, I loved the series.
Good.
I'm really glad I read it. I will read it again, but it will probably be a few years before I try it. So
Yeah. Well, you're gonna tear through Heroes Die, then you're gonna pull Blade of Tyshal down off your shelf, and you're gonna go.
Pretty much. Yeah. Okay. Well, here are the next 3 months of my life as I try to parse out this book. No, it's good call. I'm glad you made me read it. What are friends for?
I'm glad you did.
Beyond torture, I guess. So
I had a great time revisiting it, and I had a particularly great time talking about it from a different perspective. And like I loved our Inking Out Loud episodes, but it was such a different situation where, first off, on these, it's just the two of us. Mm. So there's kind of more space in the episodes to get deeper into things than the more like panel oriented version we did with like Jared and Pat and Rob.
Sure.
And so, yeah, like getting to really dig into the subtext and the thematic issues in the series, I thought was a ton of fun. Now that we have bonus episodes on it and stuff, I should have just done that from the beginning, but I'm very glad we did this.
Yeah. Agreed. Fully agreed. Now let's do some final drafts.
Virtually toast. Yeah.
Hey, hold up that glass. Let's see what you got there. Drew is holding the dual branded Tulip beer glass with the Legendarium and Inking Out Loud logos.
I need to get an updated one with the new Inking Out Loud logo. This is our OG.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know what? Maybe I should have done our OG as well, but that's what we had at the time. All right, so Drew, what are you drinking tonight?
So Craig did spring this final draft on me, so I did not come prepared with a thematically appropriate beer. However, I did come prepared with a delicious beer. This is a double dunkel dark lager from Wibby Brewing Company in Longmont, Colorado. So it's a dark lager, but it's brewed with cacao and lagered on Madagascar vanilla beans. And it is excellent. Yeah. Whew.
That sounds really good. Yeah, and Dunkel is among my favorite styles. I love a good, and I'm not a big Weissbier guy, the wheat beers, but a Dunkelweizen is like a really well done one is among my favorite treats out there. I love them. So nice. Okay, speaking of treats, Drew.
Yeah, I want to know what you brought.
First of all, I'm going to tell you what. We're going to keep going.
You're back.
I'm back. Okay. First of all, I'll tell you what's in it. This is from Temple and Family Brewing. This is the one I
recognize that label.
Bring on. Yep. So it's called Jesse Del Mar, and this is a member of the family. I believe it was like a father-in-law of the brewer. So Jesse Del Mar is the name of the guy that he named his. It's not the flagship beer, but it's the big shareable barrel-aged stout, right? The one that you write home about. It's called Jesse Del Mar. Well, this is the Lebkuchen cookie version, right? If you've ever done Oktoberfest, those are the big like gingerbread, kind of heart-shaped gingerbread cookies that they have at Oktoberfest. And the reason I brought this on is because it was named for Jesse Del Mar, but this, the adjuncted version, is Jesse Del Mar-ish.
Okay.
Have you figured out why I got this beer out?
I believe I do.
Because basically every character in this book is not the character, it's the character-ish. And so as I'm thinking about what am I going to bring on, I got it. That's the best I could do thematically for this one. Because
I'll add one more layer to that.
All right.
To to paraphrase Cain, black hair, black beard, black clothes, black knife, black oil, black beer.
Black beer. Yeah, this stuff is delicious. So there you go, everybody. Thus concludes our wanderings through the Acts of Cain. I hope you enjoyed it. This is one that I know won't attract as many listeners because this isn't as well known. However, what I want out of this series, I'll tell you at the end. Now that all four of you are left listening, what I want out of this series is for those who have enjoyed it, and even for those who maybe didn't enjoy it so much, maybe you're on the fence, you're not sure how much you like the series. Let's talk about it. Go to Discord. Let's talk about it. I need to work out what the heck I just read. I would love to hear what other people have to say about it, things you loved about it, problems you had with it, where you come down on, what you think he was saying philosophically and how much you agree with all that. Like, I really want to dig in.
Change?
I want to dig into this series. So go to Discord. You can find the link at thelegendarium.com if you're not already on there. And then the other thing would be tell your friends to read Matthew Stover, because I want more people in on this conversation, and we want to make, book 5, for lack of a better term, a freaking giant bestseller. So
yes,
we will see how that goes. All right, Drew, thanks again.
Thank you, Craig. This has been a delightful year-ish.
Oh gosh, it has been a long time.
Since we started.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks, everybody.
So worth it.
We will talk to you next time.